Okay, so last week we spoke about the size of a kazayas. Just to give you a picture of where we're coming from and where we're going over here, I would like to, today I'm going to primarily focus on the size of a Revi'is, which is the amount we use for drinking, specifically in the context of Pesach. It's for the 4 cups of wine, but that's also throughout the year when it comes to Kiddush, and also, as we'll see, when it comes to an after bracha over drinks. We're going to touch on all of that momentarily. Before I get into Revi'is, I have a number of follow-ups of sort of perhaps some extra detail and loose strings to tie up from last week. And then Miyat Hashem next week, we're going to be talking about a related topic, not completely dependent, but a related topic, is about money, different currencies used by the Torah and what they mean practically today. And the most practical relevance is about Pidyon Haben. How much silver need one give to the Kohen for the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben? And we're actually going to have a special exhibit A. We're going to have an in-house Pidyon Haben over here next Sunday morning.
Really?
Where somebody an adult who has not yet been redeemed, is going to be doing so next Sunday. So it's a Sudas mitzvah.
Wow.
And everybody should come. Hopefully we'll have a minyan at least. And we'll talk about Pidyon Haben next week. So, I want to open up with a Tshuvas HaGoinim, which unfortunately I don't have in front of me right now, the exact text. But I saw it together with Arya Monday night, quoted in Rabbi Bodner's book on Kazayas, where he brings a letter from the Goinim which says that the reason why Hashem gave us the Shiurim of Torah in these measurements of food, rather than in actual weights and measures. You know, every society has weights and measures. So why didn't Hashem say, so many, whatever it is, whether it's a weight measure or volume, a unit of volume or a unit of weight? Why did Hashem tell us like an olive, like an egg, like a barley, why didn't He just say
an inch, a kilogram, a pound?
Exactly, or whatever the equivalent of then was then. And the Goinim write that because Hashem foresaw that the Jewish people over the generations were going to be all over the world, where they use different types of units of measurements, dispersed both geographically across the world and also chronologically. The units that are used in the world today in all different societies are not the same as they were once upon a time. Pretty much in the world today, for the most part, there's the two systems, the metric system, which I believe most of the world uses, and then there's the system here in the United States, which I'm not sure what it's called, but the inch foot and all of that. Then you have England, which uses like a hybrid of those systems, so that's confusing. But until not so long ago, for example, we're going to talk a little bit about the Russian units of measurement. Until fairly recently, they were using completely different units of measurements in Russia. Okay. Let's start off, like I said, by touching up some things from last week. So I asked the question of a contradiction in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, and as soon as I finished the class, I realized that the solution, that it's not a contradiction at all, and that actually the solution is very obvious, and this is a really important point. When the Alter Rebbe brings, so we mentioned last week, there's one opinion that a kazayas is half of an egg, and another opinion that a kazayas is less than a third of an egg, but we don't know how much less, right? And by the way, that was another mistake I made. I said that the way we get to less than a third is because we know that a kesevas hagasa, a date, is a third, and we know that a kazayas is less than a date. But actually, the correct thing, the Rambam was not talking about a date. He's talking about a gregorus, which is a fig, and that's in the context of eruvin, how much bread you need to put aside when you create an eruv. Anyway, the bottom line is, that opinion, the opinion that we call the Rambam's opinion, is that the kazayas is a little bit less than a third of an egg. Now, how much less? So, at the beginning of the Sif, the Alter Rebbe said a little bit less, and at the end of the Sif, he said a lot less. And the context is very clear, because in the beginning of the Sif, he's telling you how much you have to eat. In order to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, for example, according to the Rambam, you have to eat a little bit less than a third. We can't say, because maybe it's only a little bit less. We don't know how much less it is. But at the end of the Sif, he's trying to tell you that you always have to err on the side of caution in both directions. So, in other words, if you're going to eat something, you have to make a bracha achrona, burn nefashos, if you ate a kazayis. So either you have to make sure to eat a lot less than a third, because only then do you know that it's for sure not a kazayis.
And then for sure you're not making a bracha.
And for sure you don't say bracha achrona. Or you have to eat the equivalent of half of an egg, and then you do say bracha achrona. So halach l'maisa, we pass that you say bracha achrona after you've eaten the volume of half of an egg. But But you should only eat a lot less than a third. How much less? I think that nowadays, as we discussed last week, we could fairly convincingly say that that we know that an olive is actually ranges somewhere between 5 and 7 cubic centimeters. So it comes out to be, I think, somewhere about a tenth of an egg, so a fifth of half an egg. I mean, no, that's the other way around. Is it a tenth of an egg? In other words, yeah. It's an egg is approximately 50 cubic centimeters. So an olive, right? So I mean the numbers are very.
A tenth of an egg.
An olive is approximately a tenth of an egg, give or take. Okay. Now another important question that somebody asked me after the class last week, which the Gemara discusses explicitly, so I want to address that. We mentioned the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ate an olive, and he made an after bracha after eating one olive. So the question he asked me was, well, doesn't an olive have a pit? So if we're saying that this measurement is the volume of an olive, well, the volume of an olive is more than you could eat, because then you have to take out the pit, so you've actually eaten less than the volume of an olive. So there are two answers to this question. The Gemara, the Bavli, our Gemara, what we call our Gemara, the Bavli says that the olive that Rabbi Yochanan ate was not an average olive, it was a big olive. And minus the pit, it comes out to the same volume as a average olive. The Yerushalmi has a different answer. The answer of the Yerushalmi is that actually this has nothing to do with the volume of how much you have to eat in order to make a bracha achrona, but rather because there's another criteria which qualifies for bracha achrona, and that is if you eat something whole. And because you eat a whole olive, so even if it's less than the size of an olive, because you've lost the volume of the pit, it still warrants a bracha achrona. And based on that, sorry?
It's like a birria.
Exactly, a birria. And therefore, Tosfos say, and we pass like this halacha, that you should never eat something that's an entire natural thing. If it's less, if you don't know for sure it's going to be kazai. So, for example, you should never eat one grape. You should either eat half a grape, or you should eat enough grapes to be the size of half of an egg. Similarly, pomegranate seeds. Those are, if I recall correctly, those are the two examples in Tosfos and Brachos that he gives. In addition to not eating a whole olive, is to not eat a whole grape and a whole pomegranate seed, because according to Yerushalmi, you would have to make a bracha achrona because it's a whole unit. And according to the Bavli, you wouldn't make a bracha achrona because according to the Bavli, you only make a bracha achrona if you have actually the volume of the kazayis.
And that might be
what?
If you actually have the volume of a kazayis, so a grape would be too small, ostensibly.
And that would be even true even if it's a very small olive or a very small grape.
Correct.
Potentially.
A pomegranate, according to the Yerushalmi, you would make a bracha on a pomegranate seed. One pomegranate seed, you would make a bracha achrona.
Because it's whole.
Because it's a whole natural unit, right? Now, okay, I want to move on again. I'm just covering some loose ends from last week over here. So last week, when we showed the different measurements and the sizes of matzah, I said there's no reason to eat any more than this. So I already mentioned last week that you eat a little bit more because some of it gets stuck in between your teeth. But there's another two reasons perhaps to eat more than that. And I think that most people, again, we have to sort of frame the discussion over here. Most people eat more than that anyway. It's just that when you have somebody who has difficulty eating matzah and he just wants to do the mitzvah, so then you have to narrow it down to the bare minimum requirement size. So there's two more reasons to eat more. One is that in addition to whatever gets stuck between your teeth, if there's often a lot falls on the floor because you're in this sort of awkward position and you're leaning, and so you have to, if you're gonna sort of prepare yourself a bag and weigh the amount of matzah with the exact amount, then it's a good idea to add a little bit more to account for some of it perhaps falling into your beard or onto the floor. And in another inyan, which it's difficult to know exactly how much this is halachic and how much this is more sort of meta halachic or whatever the case is, but there is this idea in Chassidus Sfarim and even in halachic Sfarim a little bit that actually that it's not shot that there's a mitzvah to eat a kazayis matzah and then that's it. You've done the mitzvah. It's like there's certain mitzvahs. You do the mitzvah, and then once it's done, it's done. You shake lulav. That's it. You've done the mitzvah. You don't get more mitzvah for holding the lulav for an extra 5 minutes. Yeah, you hold it. That's it. You've done the mitzvah. Whereas when it comes to matzah, there's even a possible allusion to this. I think the Avnei Nezer brings from the Gemara that there's this idea that eating more matzah is better. So it doesn't. In other words, what we spoke last week is all about how much you have to eat for the kazayis, but there is this idea that eating more is a good idea because the more matzah you eat, the more mitzvah you get, and it obviously has all the spiritual qualities of the bread of faith and the bread of healing, etc. But okay, so I just wanted to sort of add that to the record. And finally, the last follow-up to last week was that I mentioned last week a rumor that Reb Chaim, that we discussed how Reb Chaim Noah had this very strange way of measuring the volume of matzah by crushing it up and putting it b'doiche katzum with great pressure into a cup, and somehow coming to the very strange conclusion that matzah has the same relative density as water. And so I said that there's this rumor that Reb Chaim Noah retracted this way of measuring it. So I looked into that a little bit, and there is this rumor, and then you have articles from some of Reb Chaim Noah's family, from a grandson of his who lives in New York, and others who vehemently deny the rumor, and the rumors continue to fly in both directions, and of course...
The rumor of the retraction or rumor of the crushing?
No, the crushing he writes explicitly in at least 2 or 3 places in his sefer. But we discussed last week. I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen. We discussed last week that nobody accepts this.
But as a former lab technician, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, to measure the density of a solid.
Well, it depends on what your criteria for measuring the density is. The halacha is that the holes in the matzah count toward the kazayis, not just in the matzah, the holes in anything. Reb Chaim Noah comes up with this idea that the holes that count toward the kazayis are only microscopic holes, which he calls the porous. Anyway, okay.
So
now, when it comes
very close to water, right?
No, the metzias is that, again, like I mentioned last week, there are many experts in the field of shiurei Torah in this last generation, and they all come to the same conclusion with all the different lab ways of measuring matzah, with the water displacement and grapeseed displacement, and using the what's that called, the tool that they measure with. I mentioned it
something
last week.
seed, rapeseed.
No. There's a tool that they use to measure exactly
Calipers.
The calipers, a caliper. That's right. Anyway, the bottom line is everybody agrees that the relative weight of matzah to water is approximately half. Maybe it's 0.55%. Maybe I think one measurement even might have been machmir as much as 0.6%, 0.6, not percent. And then you have on the other side, some people got it as low as 0.3 or 0.35, whatever. The exact, we're not going to review
but
everything.
For him, it's 1:1.
Yeah. All right. Last week, I mentioned about Revi'is, just very briefly, that the Revi'is in Chabad, the size that we use for Revi'is is 86 cubic centimeters, which is in fluid ounces about 2.9 fluid ounces. Now, Bichlal, I mentioned already last week, the reason, in all the Sfarim that talk about these, because they're not usually based in America, they're using the metric system. The metric system also makes a lot more sense, at least in this context, because the volume and the volume and the weight match up, right? A cubic centimeter weighs a cubic centimeter of water weighs 1 gram. In addition, but obviously everything can be converted into the units that we use here in this country, and you have to remember, it can be confusing when we're talking in ounces, that there's an ounce which is a which is a unit of weight, and then there's a fluid ounce which is a unit of volume. So we have to bear that in mind to use those word ounce and fluid ounce accurately. Now, last week I got a very frantic voice note from a friend of mine. How dare you say that according to Chabad we rely on 86 milliliters, which is 2.9 ounces or so, let's call it 3 ounces, fluid ounces, to be a Revi'is. There is a tradition from the Alter Rebbe that a Revi'is is, I don't remember exactly what the tradition is, but that it's 120, that it's 115, and so how could you say any different than that? Now,
milliliters, 115 milliliters.
Yeah, 115 milliliters, 120 milliliters, 100. There's all these traditions. What is going on over here? So I spent a lot of time review. I mean, it wasn't the first I've heard of it. I've heard of that tradition before, and I spent a lot of time looking into it during the week, in the beginning of the week, and I was going to I came here, I actually started preparing a whole chart to show you all the old units of measurements that they used to use in Russia and how they match up to grams and to fluid ounces and to ounces, etc. But really all of that is more or less irrelevant. There's a number of things at play over here. Number one, the Alter Rebbe, there's two stages when you talk about the sizes that the Alter Rebbe gave. There's two stages in the Alter Rebbe's teachings on this. The Alter Rebbe taught this in regards to two halachas. Number one, to the size of a mikveh. A mikveh, we're going to be talking about a mikveh a lot today. A mikveh has to be 40 sa'ah, which is a measurement of volume. And also, in terms of Hilchas Nida, there is the volume of a gris, which is a certain size of how big a stain of blood has to be, less than that size in order to qualify for in the laws of Nida for certain leniencies. We're not going to get into that right now. Now, the Alter Rebbe spoke about certain sizes for these things, but then later the Alter Rebbe retracted them. We have a number of different testimonies from the Alter Rebbe's brother and from the Tzemach Tzedek and others that the Alter Rebbe reviewed that whole topic and retracted it to a smaller size. So one thing we know for sure is that within the Alter Rebbe, whenever you see any measurement from the Alter Rebbe about something, you first, or from any of the Rebbeim, you first have to figure out, was this said in the early days when he held of the bigger size, or when it came into the lower size? Another thing you have to keep in now, and that's the scholars who discuss these different traditions from the Alter Rebbe, Bar Levin and others. The Erem Chaim Noah discusses them a lot. They're all busy trying to figure out exactly how much is this in milliliters and grams, and how does that compare to the other measurements, and is it before the retraction, after the retraction? However, there's a number of other important things at play. When it comes to mikvah, so first of all, we're rounding everything up. Because, for two reasons. First of all, when it comes to mikvah, there is a very, very strong tendency to be machmir. We want to go, any chumrah you could possibly throw in. We don't say that. For most areas in Torah, we don't say that we're looking as much as possible for chumras. When it comes to building a kosher mikveh, any possible chumrah that you could think of, go right ahead. We look very much for chumras. There's a number of different traditions why. And so we find even the Rebbe Rashab, when he was building a mikveh, which is another source of some of the traditions, is that Rabbi Yankel Landau, who was the Rav in the Rebbe Rashab's chotzer, gave over what the Rebbe Rashab told him how much water to put for the mikveh when they were building the mikveh in Rostov. So when you come to mikveh, you're going to be very machmir. So you're going to round it up, and you're going to go according to the most possible strict opinion about how much the measurements are. And also, besides rounding it up for the sake of chumrah, and also because water evaporates, so you want to have extra and to make sure. Also, they were rounding it up practically. In other words, like for example, one of the relevant testimonies over there is that somebody measured the Frierdiker Rebbe's becher, and the Frierdiker Rebbe's becher, he says, was 100 grams. 2 sotka. A sotka is a Russian, means like a double shot glass, but it's 100 grams. It's about 3.3 ounces. So, fluid ounces. So, okay, then somebody says, no, it wasn't an accurate measurement. It was an accurate measurement. Obviously, the rumors and the polemics go up and back. But the bottom line is, just because somebody has a becher that's 100 grams, that doesn't mean that he holds that that's what a Revi'is is. All it means is that he holds that 100 grams contain a Revi'is. A Revi'is may well be less than 100 grams. So the same is true when the Rebbe Rashab or whichever Rebbe is telling you that X amount is the right amount for a mikveh. They're using contemporary Russian units. So there's an emer, which means a bucket, which was some sort of measurement, and there were other measurements that they're referring to over there. It could be it was just sort of a convenience. It's like I tell you that a Revi'is is 3 ounces, right? Now, in fact, I don't really mean that a Revi'is is 3 ounces. What I mean is that a Revi'is is 2.92 ounces. But I'm just going to say 3 ounces because, 3 ounces is a Revi'is, and that's good enough. So, there's many articles and things written about all these traditions. So, but the bottom line is, there isn't anything to come out from there. Clearly, we see the Frierdiker Rebbe did have less than any of those shmuas from the Rebbe Rashab, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Alter Rebbe. They're all more than 100 grams, which was the size of the 100 milliliters, which is 100 grams, which is 100 cubic centimeters. So the Frierdiker Rebbe's becher was less than that. And like I said, there's an element of rounding up, there's an element of being machmer for mikveh. And the truth is that you can't really start paskening halacha based on sometimes you have a clear tradition, you start paskening halacha. We have a tradition, you have a tradition, but when you don't have a clear tradition and you do have clear discussions in the poskim, so you don't start paskening halacha based on that. And then there's one more very important aspect over here is that, as we'll see soon, if you adjust the size of the Revi'is, and you say that a Revi'is is, let's say, 120 milliliters, so then accordingly everything else has to, I'm going to explain soon why, but the units of volume and the units of length are at least supposed to directly correlate. So if you're going to say that a Revi'is is 120 milliliters, then you're going to have to extend your Amma and all the other measurements in all other areas of Torah. And we don't find that was practiced in Chabad. And like we spoke last week, that the Rabbi himself had fairly small kazesim for eating matzah. And in other areas also, you might find somebody had, for the most part, we don't find that people were machmir in other areas. So the bottom line, what I'm trying to say is that even if you do as an individual want to say, oh, there's this tradition from the Alter Rebbe, so I'm going to use a bigger cup for the 4 cups of wine, fine, so you could be machmir there, but that doesn't spill over into other areas of halacha where you start saying that therefore the amma is bigger and everything else is bigger also, which obviously leads to many kulas, as again, hopefully we'll touch upon some examples as we go along today. Again, I want to point out that just like we said last week, that having bigger sizes of a kazayis to say that you have to eat more matzah can also result in a kula. So the same is true in a leniency. The same is true when it comes to Revi'is, that having a big Revi'is can result in a leniency for a number of reasons. But I'll just point to 2 reasons that are relevant to the Seder night. Number 1 is that ideally you're supposed to drink the entire cup of the 4 cups of wine. You're supposed to finish the whole thing, and ideally you're even supposed to do it in 1 gulp. So if you have 3 ounces, it's not that difficult to drink 3 ounces, and it's not that difficult to drink 3 ounces in 1 go. But if you're going to say, like we'll get soon to the Chazon Ish, or to other thing that actually it's 5.5 ounces, so then it's going to be a lot harder to drink the whole thing. So again, it's not always a chumrah, because there's no chumrah to have in other words, the chumrah is to drink the whole cup, not to drink the amount of the Revi'is. So if you have a cup that's exactly Revi'is, so then you drink the whole cup, you're good. But having a bigger cup may also be a leniency. That's one point. Another point is that ideally on the Seder night, you're supposed to have wine, not grape juice, and not just regular wine, but even wine with some significant alcohol content. Some people say 5%, 6%, whatever the case is. And again, with smaller cups, that is much easier to accomplish than it is with bigger cups. So the bottom line is that halacha l'maisa, we paskin that Reb Chaim Noah says that Revi'is is 86 cubic centimeters, which is 86 milliliters, which is 2.9 something fluid ounces. And indeed, if we're throwing rumors from the Rabbeim into the equation, we'll also throw in another one, that there was a shliach, the Rebbe's shliach in Argentina was Rebbe Baumgarten, and apparently the Rebbe told him, this was referenced from a certain diary in Kfar Chabad, which I was not able to obtain a copy of, but it says that the Rabbi told him when he was, I guess, distributing wine and matzah for the 4 cups of wine, to rely on this opinion of Reb Chaim Noah of 86 milliliters. Now, practically speaking, Rabbi said, when it comes to eating food, we said before that you need to make sure not to be in an area of doubt, do I have to make it after bracha or not? So you either have to eat a lot less than 1/3 of an egg, or you have to have more half of an egg. What about when it comes to drink? How much do you have to drink? So the Mishnah Berurah says that when it comes to drink, we have a doubt. We don't know if you say the after bracha for a drink when you drink kazayis of liquid, or when you drink a Revi'is of liquid. Now the difference between a kazayis and a Revi'is is huge, because a Revi'is is 1.5 eggs. So whereas a kazayis ranges from anywhere between a lot less than 1/3 of an egg to a half of an egg, a Revi'is is 1.5 eggs. I'll actually give to you right now the formula that we use for this. It's if you have a pen and paper, whatever, you might want to write this down, or I'll write it down right here and show it to you. you write down on the paper askalab, in Hebrew, askalab. Aleph Samach Kuf Lamed Beis, I don't know if you could all see that, which stands for Efa, Sa'ah, Kav, Lug, Beitza. Those are 5 measurements that we use in Torah. And then underneath it, you write Gu Du, which is Gimel Vav Daled Vav, which is 3646. And now I'll translate this to you. Askalab Gudu, that's all you have to remember. 1 Efa is 3 Sa'ah, 1 Sa'ah is 4 Kav, 1 Kav is 4 Lug, 1 Lug is 6 Beitzim, eggs, right? So a Lug is 6 eggs. A Revi'is, the word we're using Revi'is actually means a quarter. Why is it called a quarter? Because it's a quarter of a lug. So if a lug is 6 eggs and a lug is 4 quarters of a lug, 4 Revi'is, so then the result is that a Revi'is is an egg and a half. And if you want to know how many eggs are in a mikveh, well, 1 sa'ah is 6 kav, which is 4 lugs. So 6 times 4 means that there are 24. I'm sorry, why am I here? 6 times 4 means there are 24 lugim in a sa'ah. What?
What's the higher value, a sa or a lug?
A sa'ah is bigger than a lug. 1 sa'ah is 6 kav, and 1 kav is 4 lug. So how many lug on a sa'ah? 24. How many revi'is are in that? 24 times 4 is? Come on, pull your calculators
96.
out. What's 24 times 4?
96.
96. Is that right? Yes?
96.
Okay, now that's 1 sa'ah. How much is 40 sa'ah? So what's 40 times 96?
40 times 96?
1,000.
So 4 times 100.
So it'd be 38,
minus
40.
3840. So there are, if you want to know how many revi'is, how many revi'is are in 40 sa'ah, the answer is 3,840. How many eggs are in 40 sa'ah? The answer is, based on this chart, the answer is going to come out to 5,760. Okay, so 5,760 eggs, that is the volume of 40 sa'ah. Now, so the Mishnah Berurah says that when it comes to drinking, we don't know, do you say a bracha achrona after the size of an olive or after the size of a revi'is, and therefore you have to avoid that twilight, that area of doubt. So for those who follow the Mishnah Berurah, that's the halacha, that's the chumrah they follow. However, the Alter Rebbe is much more lenient than the Mishnah Berurah, and the Alter Rebbe paskins that this doubt, that we don't know how much something is only applies to wine, not to other drinks. And so, according to the Alter Rebbe, you can lechatchila, without any problem, go and drink 70 milliliters of orange juice, for example, and that's it. There's no bracha achrona. You had less than a revi'is. You don't say ber nefashos. There's nothing wrong with doing that at all. You're perfectly allowed to eat less than the amount. When it comes to wine, however, there the Alter Rebbe holds like that there's the doubt, and therefore when you drink wine, you either have to drink more than 86 milliliters, or you have to drink less than the size of an olive, which, like we said last week, is a lot less than a third of an egg, and let's say it's about 6 or 7 milliliters, which is not very much. Right? Can somebody bring out the phone over here and tell me what is 6 milliliters in fluid ounces?
It's like almost 1/5 of an ounce.
Just Google 6 milliliters into
0.000203 U.S. fluid ounces.
Okay, basically it's a very small amount. Okay, it sounds a bit much, but fine. Now,
But wait, why?
so
why
practically,
an olive size?
because there's a machlokas whether the bracha achrona for wine is after kazayas or revi'is.
Okay.
Now, practically speaking, this is very, very relevant to Kiddush on Shabbos day. Because like this, if you're having your Shabbos meal Friday night, Shabbos day, doesn't matter, you have a small amount of wine from Kiddush, not the person who's making Kiddush, the people who are listening to Kiddush, have a small amount of wine, that's no problem, because afterwards you're going to wash and you're going to bench, and the benching covers the wine. So that's not a problem. But if you're at a Kiddush on Shabbos day, and you want to go and so there you're not benching. You're just going to say, you're not benching what we call benching, which is the full 3 brachas long benching. You're going to say bracha me'en shalish. You're going to say ala michya and ber nefashos. Now you need to know: do you include in your after bracha also al hagefen? So in order to include al hagefen, you have to have 86 milliliters of wine. Now, you don't need to have any wine. You could listen to Kiddush Shabbos Day and not drink any wine at all.
Or Kiddush on Pesach, right?
No, not for Pesach. For Pesach, you need to
No,
have
I'm saying for Kiddush, like say during the day on Pesach, sometimes they'll have a Kiddush out, right? So they have nothing that's ala mechia.
Yeah.
So your Suda is going to be your grape juice, or wine.
Right. So anytime you're having wine, which you're not benching afterwards, you have to be careful about this. So what happens is, I see this a lot here on Shabbos Day, after the rabbi makes Kiddush, so people come and they want to taste a little bit of wine because, people like to do that. Again, it's not necessary. We've discussed that in the past. In Ashurim on Kiddush, you could Google them. They're on the YouTube channel. But if you want to do that, that's fine. But then you have to make sure to either have a lot, which is 86 milliliters, which is 3 ounces, or to have the tiniest sip. Because as soon as you have more than the very small amount of 5 or 6 milliliters, you've already entered into your zone where you're no longer a lot less than a third of an egg, and therefore you have a problem whether or not you should say an after blessing. In theory, there could be other workarounds. You could hear the after blessing from somebody else, maybe. But the bottom line is, you should either when you're having a kiddush, when you're having wine, and you're not doing benching afterwards, your 3 options are either have more than 86 milliliters, or don't have any. No need to have any wine, or have a tiny sip. Okay. Exactly. By the way, if just point of reference, you may recall that before Yom Kippur, we were sitting over there. We had a whole class about the size of a Revi'is and the size of a kazayas and how fast a person has to drink on Yom Kippur in order for it to combine for the shir. We had a whole class about that. Again, it's on the YouTube channel. It's on the podcast. You can follow it up over there. Yes.
A Revi'is, you said, is more than the size of an egg. By
Revi'is is an egg and a half. An egg and a half. Okay. That's Muslim. Everybody agrees that the Revi'is is an egg and a half. We don't necessarily agree how big an egg is, but we all agree that an egg and a half is a Revi'is. Okay. So, until now, that's sort of practically speaking, that's quote unquote the bottom line. I'm going to talk a little bit about the behind the scenes, the history of all of this, and you'll see that there's some really, really interesting stuff going on over here. First of all, I should point out, I think I may have mentioned this last week, but it's important to know, this that we call today the Shir of Chazon Ish and the Shir of Chaim Noah, it's not really accurate. Reb Chaim Noah isn't the inventor of that shitter, and the Chazon Ish isn't the inventor of the other shitter, but they are 2 contemporary poskim who very much published and were Isaac in this sugya a lot, so it sort of became known colloquially as the Shir Chazon Ish and the Shir Reb Chaim Noah, but obviously the story goes a lot further back. The problem with determining how big the shiurim are go back all the way to the Gemara's size for the mikvah. A mikvah has to be the size that a whole person's body can be submerged in the water, and the Gemara says that the size of the mikvah is the size of a person's body. The average size is, you take a box which is 3 amas tall, 1 amma wide, and 1 amma deep, and that is the size of a mikvah. That's what Gemara says. That is Kibul Chazal or Shir Chazal. That is the size of a body of water, a volume of water that an average person's body can be submerged in. It's again based on Reb Chaim Noah's Shurim. That would be 4.5 feet tall and 1.5 feet wide and 1.5 feet deep. Now, l'chayr, you could ask, why do we need this measurement at all? We already know. Askel Abgudu. Askel Abgudu tells us that 40 sa'ah is 5,760 eggs. So all we need to know the volume of an egg, multiply that by 5,760, and then you know how big 40 sa'ah is. But for whatever reason, Chazal gave us this measurement of the cubits, the feet, right? The amas. Now, here's a big problem in Shurim, and this is the Chazon Ish, the Yehuda. This is the big problem. Okay, everybody ready? Ostensibly, if you learn this Gemara, what you will come up is that if you take 5,760 eggs, and there's the discussion we noted last week, does it mean eggs with the shell or without the shell? Okay. By the way, interesting to note, the whole method of how to measure with water displacement is brought in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch. You could look at it here in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tov Nun Vav, Sif Beis, where I actually tried this at home with my kids this week. You fill up a cup of water, you weigh you see how much water it is, and then you basically take another cup the same size, put the egg in it, and fill up the water, and then you measure how much water is left in the original cup. And that is because if you do the regular displacement method, if you're not in a lab, there's going to be water splashing, and it's going to be very hard to make it accurate. You put the egg in and the water splashes. So this way is a way to do it that's more yields more accurate results. Anyway, okay, here's the big problem with shiurim. Ostensibly, if you take a box which is 1 amma wide, 1 amma, 1 amma by 1 amma, and 3 ammas tall, that should match up to the box that contains the volume of 5,760 eggs. The problem is they don't. Right? That was the big problem. The big problem is that, and this is the Noda B'Yehuda, the Tzlach, which the Chazon Ish's cup is taking from, and it's already being pointed out that the Tzlach is not the first person to make this observation. The numbers simply don't seem to match up. Okay? So how are we going to deal with this problem? How are we going to deal with the problem that the numbers simply don't match up? So there are basically three approaches.
It doesn't match up in which direction?
That the eggs, if you go with the eggs, it's going to be about half of the size as it is if you're going to go with the cubits, with the ammas. The mikveh, that's 5,760 eggs, is approximately half the size of 3 ammas by 1 amma by 1 amma. Okay?
Oh, it's less.
It's a lot less, right? So, there's basically 3 ways, more or less. There's obviously, when it comes to the very fine details, there's some variances, but there's basically, in general, three approaches to deal with this issue. The first is we'll call it the shita of the Chazon Ish. What the Chazon Ish, what the Noda B'Yehuda says is that eggs nowadays, are half of the size that eggs used to be in the time of Chazal. Okay, so whereas nowadays, what measurement was the Chazon Ish and the Noda B'Yehuda using for an egg? They are assuming that an egg is 50 cubic centimeters, 50 milliliters worth.
Chicken egg.
A chicken egg, an average chicken egg. Now, if you want to do the measurements yourself, you can. You have to be careful because part of the discussion today is, well, what's considered the average egg? In the market today, there's usually medium, large, and extra large, which seem to indicate that large is what the Chazal will be referring to as the Beinani. Be that as it may, the point of departure was that an egg is 50 milliliters, 50 cubic centimeters. So now we're going to say that once upon a time the shiurim were a lot bigger than that. They were 100, the eggs were double, or 100 cubic centimeters, and then, quote unquote, everything matches up perfectly. There are numerous problems with this shitta, and I'm not going to focus on that now, for a number of reasons. First of all, because, we could just talk for hours and hours, but nobody really paskins like, certainly in Chabad, but even outside of Chabad, nobody really paskins like the Chazon Ish. Like this shitta, at the most, they choishish for it l'chumra, that they try to be machmir to do that shitta, but everybody understands that there are many problems with this, and the Metzias is that the minhag throughout all kehillas in Europe and Eretz Yisrael, Ashkenazim, Sephardim, has always been, nobody ever considered eggs to be that big, nobody ever considered, we have tradition, right? And there's a story of the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim says to be machmir like the Chazon Ish, and then somebody saw that he had a small becher, so he said, how could you make kiddush on such a small becher? You yourself said that you should be machmir like the Chazon Ish and use a becher that, according to his shitta, comes out to about 5.5 fluid ounces for Revi'is. So the Chafetz Chaim said, I also had a father. In other words, if you're telling me, if I'm learning the sugya, I'm going to say you should be machmir because that's what comes out from the sugya. But what I do in practice, I do what my father did.
Who's this?
The Chafetz Chaim in the Shabura. That's the story. I can't verify the story, but
he was following not the Chazon Ish, the B'Yehuda.
Yeah. Now, okay. The bottom line is, there's many problems with the Chazon Ish. Essentially, basically, what comes out is based on all sorts of evidence, both archaeological evidence and also evidence from other statements of Chazal. For example, we have Chazal talking about the weight of barley and other things, and we compare them to contemporary. According to Chazon Ish, you would have to say that everything in the world remained the same size, besides eggs, and besides eggs and people, like it's very straight. All the problems with the Chazon Ish's shitta are very major. Okay.
Wait, everything stays the same size except for eggs?
Basically.
But the
And
Chazon Ish would also say that
and
olives
also
change
people.
size,
No,
right?
not the olive. He doesn't say the olives. He's not sure if olives changed its size, but he says people became a little bit smaller.
It's a half the size of the eggs that supposedly existed back then, right?
Lav dafka. It's complicated what the Chazon Ish holds about kazayis. We touched on it a little bit last week. Again, I don't want to focus on that too much, just because we have very limited time. Now, Reb Chaim Noah took a different approach. Reb Chaim Noah is basing himself on the Rambam. And the Rambam tells you that the weight of a Revi'is of water is 27 dirham. Dirham is a coin, a currency, that was in use for many, many hundreds of years around that part of the world. And in Reb Chaim Noah's days, in Israel, before the establishment of the state, there were still dirhams in circulation. They were still being used as a currency. So, if the Revi'is of water weighs the same weight as 27 dirham, so how much is a dirham? So Reb Chaim Noah said, a dirham, we weighed the dirham is 3.2 grams. So as it worked out that basically the Revi'is, like we said, was 86 cubic centimeters.
They said it was 2.9.
2.9 fluid ounces. It's the same thing. 2.9 fluid ounces
Same as 3.2.
is the same as 86 milliliters.
But you said something about, what was 3.2?
3.2 gram is for each dirham, but
Oh.
where Revi'is is 27 dirham. All right, so 27 times 3.2 comes out to 57.6. So basically, well, one second. Let me. So basically, one second. So what does Reb Chaim Noah do with it? So he's basing himself on this discrepancy. He's basing himself on the Rambam, which talks about the weight of this coin. What do we do with this discrepancy between the size of the mikveh, 5,760 eggs, and the size of the mikveh of 3 amos by 1 am by 1 amma? So what he does is he says, actually, you got both ends wrong. An amma is smaller than you think it is. You think that the average size, because what's an amma? An amma is 6 tefachim. A tefach is four finger breadths. How much? So it all boils down to the finger, which is the thumb. So you're assuming, right? All the people who are measuring this, we're assuming that the average size of a thumb is about 2.5 centimeters. Actually, it's less than that. It's about the average size is about 2 centimeters. So he's brought down the share of the sort of the length-based units a little bit, and then he says also the egg is a little bit bigger. You think that an egg is 50 cubic centimeters. Actually, an egg is, like we just said, 27 times 3.2, so it comes out to 57.6. Right? So basically, what Reb Chaim Noah done is he's extended the egg a little bit. He's shrunk the finger breadth a little bit, and that way he makes it all match up. Now, so those are basically two approaches. Now, before I present what the third approach is, and according to my timer here, we started the class about 12 minutes late today, so we'll probably go a little bit over as well. Before we go to what the third approach is, I want to zone in a little bit to Reb Chaim Noah's approach. So Reb Chaim Noah's bottom line is that it's 86, that the kazayis is 86 milliliters. In other words, that an egg is 57.6 milliliters in volume. Now, Reb Chaim Noah nowadays there is a field of study called numismatics. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's
Stamps.
Nope. It's numismatac. It's the study of coins and currency.
Close.
And
Close.
you're very close. And it turns out that actually Reb Chaim Noah did the best research. In other words, Reb Chaim Noah, before he established, okay, the Rambam says 27 dirham, but how much is a dirham? Says Reb Chaim Noah, I weighed the dirham is 3.2 grams each. But hold on a second, who says that the dirhams that you're using are the same as the dirhams that the Rambam was using? Maybe there's been some change over the years. So Reb Chaim Noah, to the best of his ability, again, there wasn't even this field of study and certainly no access to internet and all these other things. To the best of his ability, he decided that actually the dirham has undergone no change whatsoever. But nowadays, we know that that's not actually the case. We know that the dirham that the Rambam was using was actually less than 3.2 grams, and we know that it was somewhere between, I think, 2.7 and 3 grams. So it was certainly a little bit less than what Reb Chaim Noah is talking about. And we know this, we can sort of corroborate this from a number of different places, because we have writings of the Ramban about the sizes of coins, and we have the Rishonim give measurements in terms of the equivalent weight of these coins, how many grains of barley they weight. So there's a lot of ways to sort of come from different directions and corroborate them. And in Yetz Hashem next week, when we're talking about Pidyon Haben, we'll talk a little bit more about the different currencies. It's very interesting to see how different Rishonim are using the currencies they had in France and Eretz Yisrael and England, and how they all come together. Very, very fascinating stuff. But what we see from all of that is that actually the dirhams Rambam was using were less than 3 grams. And in fact, he brings over here, there's always the question, which we've touched upon in a number of, we touched upon this when we spoke about the location of the Revi'is. We've touched upon this in a number, and we touched upon this when we spoke about which cities in Israel should be doing Purim on Shushan Purim. There's always the question of to what extent do we rely on contemporary scholars of archaeology, etc., especially if they're not Shomei Torah mitzvahs. Do they have halachic na'amonos? Do we trust them? It's interesting to note that I didn't check this up. I'm just quoting from this book that I'm reading from over here. That there's a book, some sort of chart, not a book, a chart that was published in the year 1340, which is sort of a chart to match up different currencies from different countries. Now nowadays the whole way economics work is different. In those days, the coin, what the currency represented was an actual weight of silver or copper, maybe, but a weight of silver or copper. It wasn't like how much the currency is. Just nowadays, the currency we use is nothing. It's just it's a legal tender because the government accepts it. So in those days, it actually meant something. And he brings over here that
it's like market value.
You see over there in the chart that it compares this coin that the Ramban uses, which is called the Bizant, is compared to 3 other coins. And again, I didn't check this up, so I'm not sure exactly what he means, but he says that the chart has these accuracies where it seems to make the difference between 4.244 grams and 4.253 grams, which is a difference of 0.2%. So you could see that even though this is a very ancient document, it was written with extreme care for detail and accuracy. So that certainly gives some sort of better credentials that we rely on this. So, after all of this research, what the scholars come out with is that actually, Reb Chaim Noah's, and again, it seems also the rayos are not just from sort of archaeology and from the Rishonim; it's also minhag. He brings a number of different stories from Gedolei Yisrael, from Europe, etc. People often had the Revi'is, a cup for Kiddush, which was less than 2.9 fluid ounces. Some people had 75, 70. He seemed, the author of this book, Hidurei Hamidus, which we spoke about last week, he sort of comes to the conclusion that it's 75 milliliters, which in fluid ounces is 1.7 fluid ounces, right? So, whereas, 1.7 is the size of an egg. It's more than 1.7. It is. Okay, who has a calculator?
Yeah, I do.
What is? Oh, I have it here. No, I don't. What is 1.7 times 1.5?
2.55.
2.5. So according to him, actually the accurate size for Revi'is is not 2.9 fluid ounces. It's closer to 2.5 or 2.6 fluid ounces. Okay. Now, like I mentioned before, 1 second. But on this, if you say by adopting the smaller size. By adopting the smaller size of a Revi'is, we're kind of making our original problem bigger. Because remember, we have this problem. The eggs don't match up with the amos. So Reb Chaim Noah, he made the tzbois a little bit bigger, the finger breadth's a little bit smaller, the egg's a little bit bigger, and it all matched up. Now, he's trying to get everything to be scientific, and he's saying, well, actually, the eggs are smaller than Reb Chaim Noah. So in a way, we're sort of back to square one. But let's just take him at his word for a moment. If we accept that the eggs are not 57 milliliters like Reb Chaim Noah says, but only 50, which was the accepted amount that the Yehuda and everybody else was working with, So again, this all translates into midas of oirech, of length and breadth as well. So I'll just give you an example. When it comes, we mentioned last week lavud, right? So when it comes to building a sukkah, there are many halachas that are associated with lavud. Lavud means that if you have something that is smaller than 3 tefachim, so then it doesn't count. So one of the, I think, most common examples, you have the sukkahs, the canvas sukkahs with the lavud straps, which go around, and you say that you need to have less than 3 tefachim in between each strap. There's other areas in sukkah. Lavud comes up in a number of areas of sukkah with schach pasel, there are loads and loads of things that lavud comes up. Now, how much is less than 3 tefachim? So according to Reb Chaim Noah, according to Reb Chaim Noah, that a Revi'is is 86 milliliters, so a tefach is 8 centimeters. So less than 3 tefachim is less than 24 centimeters, right? 24 centimeters is, anybody want to do the conversion right now on their phone? But just, you put in
2.54.
2.54 what?
Is a centimeter, 2 inch.
Okay,
Centimeter.
just put, it's easier this way, just put in 24 centimeters in inches.
Yeah.
6 inch.
I want an accurate, exact number.
9.4.
9.4
basically.
9.44 inches, right? So according to Reb Chaim Noah, leave it a second. According to Reb Chaim Noah, yes, it is. 9.4 inches is 22 centimeters. It's 24 centimeters. So according to Reb Chaim Noah, if your gap in between one strap and the next is less than 9.4 inches, you're okay. But if we're now saying that actually it seems that Reb Chaim Noah exaggerated a bit, and the actual size of an egg is not 57 cubic centimeters, but it's 50, so now the size of lavud is 22.8 centimeters, which is 8.9 inches. So it's about half an inch less than this. So when you're measuring your lavud straps exactly, that half an inch could make all the difference to whether you have 100% kosher sukkah or 100% non-kosher sukkah.
And you have to go a little bit less than that, right? You want to be on the safe side.
Right, but so usually
you don't want to go exactly.
So in other words, when I'm measuring a sukkah, I need less than 9.4 inches. I'm not going to go 9.3. I'll go less than 9. So as long as I have 9 inches or less, I'm comfortable. But actually, according to this, I need to go even less than that.
I'll be 8.
Yeah.
Okay, now, but all of this brings us back to the really big problem of what do we do with this stira? Again, we're measuring a mikvah. The two measurements don't match up. So we have already one. We explained to Chaim Noah. He says that the eggs are bigger, and the eggs used to be bigger, and that's how he answers it. And we've already discussed that that is very difficult. That is very difficult to accept. Now, we have to understand. I want to say one point about Chaim Noah's shir, which kind of segues into the third approach. Yes.
The point is the eggs back then were
double the size.
Were bigger.
Not a little bigger, double the size.
Double the size.
He says that an egg, the egg is 50 milliliters.
And based on these calculations, that's not really true because we have that measurement that forgot what the name of the measurement was. But
the
some
daram.
kind of coin, right?
The daram.
The daram.
Okay.
So
exactly.
the only other possibility would be that human beings were much smaller.
Oh, very good. So Chaim Noah let's go back to the Noda B'Yehuda. Noda B'Yehuda is sitting in Prague. He's measuring mikvahs, and he can't figure this out. What is going on over here, right? So says the Noda B'Yehuda, it must be that the eggs used to be double the size. Why does he say the eggs used to be? Maybe the eggs used to be the same, and the fingers used to be half the size.
Yeah.
So he doesn't really have any proof. He doesn't know which way to go. But he says, in general, as you read the Sadeirus, things get smaller. So he was more noted to say that the eggs got smaller rather than people got bigger.
I've been to a house.
Wait, one second. Now, you're probably making a very, very good point. I'm just trying to keep track of all the different things that we need to cover.
Tunnels.
I apologize.
My head on the.
Chizkiyahu's tunnel.
Go on, share it. I'm sorry. Share what you were going to say.
I was just saying, I've been to a house that was built in the early 1700s, and I bumped my head on the.
Oh, very, very good.
I went right through the
Metzius is
my brother-in-law. He was like,
the Metzius is the fact is that you go to old buildings. It's very, very clear a number of reasons that actually the opposite is true. People used to be smaller, and I'll also share my personal experience. If you go in the Tower of London, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
You see the armor of people It looks like
Children.
it doesn't look like midgets. It looks like teenage. It looks like
Children's.
teenagers. It looks
Children's
like
are.
looks like tall children rather than adults, right? So now you have to, just because people, even if people, let's say an average 25-year-old then was like an average 15-year-old now, that does translate to a difference in the finger breadth, but a very small difference. So that's one. So that sort of leads into another approach that says actually the eggs are the same and everything is the same. The only thing that's a little bit different are the fingers. That the fingers were a little bit smaller, and that kind of leads into that's sort of a possible another approach to try to explain this discrepancy between the two ways of measuring a mikveh. Now, there have been some other suggestions made. There are some other suggestions made to try and synthesize between them. And one of the suggestions is that actually instead of measuring the width, so if you're looking at your knuckle, instead of measuring with your thumb facing you, instead of measuring from your right to your left, the width of your thumb, you should be measuring the depth of your thumb, which is from your face to, frontwards, backwards, instead of right to left, and that way it comes out a little bit smaller. That suggestion has been made, but it seems difficult to accept. And then there's another suggestion that says it says it a little bit differently, that rather than measuring at your knuckle, you're supposed to measure at the tip of your thumb. Now, obviously, the tip of your thumb is somewhat on a slope, so there's a little bit of a, exactly where on the slope do you measure. But there's even a source for this in a Tosfos, where there's a Tosfos that suggests that it's unclear exactly. Tosfos mentions achrusay hanuroishay. It's not clear if you're supposed to measure at the tip of the thumb or the knuckle of the thumb. So there's another suggestion made to try and synthesize that, and all the numbers work out this way. That actually, when the Gemara says to take 3 amos by 1 amma for the mikveh, it's talking amos which are 6 tfachim, which are 4 finger breadths of the tip of the thumb, not of the knuckle of the thumb. Now, this all, so again, so far you could basically say we have 3 approaches, and we're going to suggest one more 4th approach. One approach is that of the Chazon Ish or the Noda B'Yehuda, that eggs used to be bigger. Another approach is that of Reb Chaim Noah, that says that fingers used to be a little bit smaller, or maybe not used to be, maybe they still are, maybe Reb Chaim Noah measures. We actually had, if you remember, years ago, Rabbi Cohen from the CRC, Rabbi David Cohen came and he gave a class here, and there were about 25 or 30 people by the class, and he brought his caliper, and he measured everybody's thumb knuckles, and his maskana was that, in fact, Reb Chaim Noah is right, that the average thumb size is smaller. Now, I'm not here going to get in between the author of Hidurei Hamidus and Rabbi David Cohen, but I do know that you can't make statistics of worldwide population by measuring 27 people in Beis Menachem.
We're very big
but,
people.
But whatever the case is, look, So again, Reb Chaim Noah's approach is the eggs used to be bigger. The Chazon Ish, Noda B'Yehuda's approach is the eggs used to be bigger. Reb Chaim Noah, again, and the point is, the real crux of it is the Chazon Ish and the Noda B'Yehuda use as the basis for their chart, scale of measurements, the thumb. That's where everything starts from, and everything has to be adjusted toward the thumb. Reb Chaim Noah says no, everything has to be adjusted towards the Dam of the Rambam, and everything gets adjusted according to that. So the eggs become a little bit bigger, the fingers become a little bit smaller. Then you have the supposedly, again, if I'm taking the contemporary author's word for it, the more scientific approach, which is actually uncovering all the different data we have, both from the Rishonim and the Darhams and the other coins and the barleys, and archaeological evidence and everything put together. And they say, no, actually nothing's changed at all. The eggs are the same, everything is the same. And maybe we could have the finger breadths used to be smaller because not used to be smaller, they still are smaller, but we're supposed to measure the tip rather than the knuckle, or something along those lines, and we get to smaller shiurim. Now, there is another approach that says, look, we don't know. We have here a major problem. We don't know which way is the right way. Maybe the fingers used to be smaller, maybe the eggs used to be bigger, maybe both, maybe something else, we don't know. So we have a kasha. You have a kasha. There's a Gemara. We have a kasha. You have a question of the Gemara. So, from the kasha start me nicht. Just because you have a question, it doesn't mean that we throw the whole Gemara under the bus. So then what do you do practically? So this approach says, and this is actually based, the theory is actually has a strong basis in a tshuva of the Beis Yosef. There's a tshuva, the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, his tshuva sefer is called Avkas Reichel, and in Avkas Reichel he was he was posed a question. The people who were writing to him wrote that they measured this mikveh in Tzfas, or the Beis Yosef himself lived in Tzfas, and also the numbers didn't match up. There they weren't talking about the eggs. They were saying that they measured it with the etzbois, with the fingers, and they measured it based on the coins that the Rambam used, and the numbers didn't match up exactly. So the Beis Yosef writes to them in Avkas Reichel that the Rambam is giving you the weight of the coins just to be helpful, but if it turns out not to be helpful, then drop the Rambam's coin and stick to your fingers, right? Why is the Beis Yosef saying that? Because the Gemara doesn't say that the size of the mikveh is X amount of coins. The Gemara says the size of the mikveh is X amount of finger breadths, of cubits. So good. So that's the ikar. You have a question that it doesn't fit. Good. So it doesn't fit, but you have to follow what the Gemara says. So therefore, this approach says you have to go b'chol mokim lefi inyana. You have to go in every case and see what is the primary unit of measurement and what is the secondary unit that we're just matching up. So, for example, when it comes for a mikveh, how do we know from the Torah how big a mikveh has to be? Because the mikveh, the Torah says, we just read this yesterday, v'rochatz is kol b'sarei b'mayim. I think we read it yesterday. Yeah, whatever it was, we read it recently. You have to wash his whole flesh and blood. So, in other words, you have to wash his whole flesh in water. So we have to have an amount of water which can contain the whole size of the human body. And Chazal says that the size of a human body is 3 amos by 1 amma by 1 amma. According to Chazal, it should also come out that is the size of 5,760 eggs, and that doesn't work out. Okay, so drop your eggs and just stick to your cubits. Right?
Oh.
It doesn't work, so it doesn't work. Okay, so we don't know. We don't know why it doesn't work. But you drop the Chazal said you follow cubits, so you follow cubits. However, if you look at the Gemara, when it comes to Revi'is, the opposite is true. In other words, Gemara also says that the size of a Revi'is is 2 finger breadths by 2 finger breadths. 1 second. It's 2 finger breadths by 2 finger breadths by 2.5 and a fifth finger breadths, right? 2.5 and a fifth is an old way of saying it. We would say, what's a half and a fifth? A half and a fifth is going to be 50% plus 20%, right? So it's going to be 70%. So 2.7, right? So it's 2 finger breadths by 2 finger breadths by 2.7 finger breadths is the size of a Revi'is, right? But that the Gemara is saying, and again we're not going to have time to get into all the proofs that this is the case, but there the Gemara is saying it's secondary. In other words, the primary volume of a Revi'is is an egg and a half. Secondary volume of a Revi'is is 2 by 2 by 2.7 finger breadths. So if the numbers doesn't match up, you have to determine what is the primary one and what is the secondary one. In the case of a mikveh, the primary measurement is the amma by 3 ammas, amma by amma by 3 ammas, so we drop the eggs. In the case of the Revi'is, the opposite is true, that the primary measurement is an egg and a half, and the 2 by 2 by 2.7 finger breadths is secondary, and therefore if we don't know which way to do it, we're going to stick to the egg and a half. And therefore, the maskana of that approach will also bring back to, in practice, using the smaller share of a Revi'is, which again, according to Rabbi Noah, is 86 milliliters. According to him, is a little bit smaller, it's 7.75 milliliters, so it's 2.5 fluid ounces, 2.9 fluid ounces, somewhere along there. That's the bottom line, lahalacha l'maisa. And like we said before, according to Alter Rebbe, this is important to know when it comes to drinking wine. That you have to make sure to either drink less than 5 or 6 milliliters or more than, would say, 86 milliliters, or some would say 75 milliliters. But that's the bottom line, la halacha l'maisa, and hopefully we've successfully given over a overview of the background and the discussion behind it. And next week in Meretz Hashem, we're going to talk again, fascinating, and I really hope to have a time to create a proper flowchart with a PowerPoint presentation to show you the weight. For Pidyon Haben, you have to have 5 sloim, exactly how much is 5 sloim, and how it comes out to how many grams it is in silver today. And we will also be actually celebrating a Pidyon Haben next Sunday as well.